The Life of St. Jerome by Father Largent.
The Lord awoke and rebuked the wind and the raging of the waters. The monster Constance dies, and calm is restored. Though the indulgence of the new prince, Julian, all the bishops who have been banished from their sees are restored to their churches. Then did Egypt receive Anathanius as a conqueror. Then did the Church of Gaul, great Hilarion, returning from the battlefield without acclamations. At the return of Eusebius, Bishop of Veracalli, Italy cast aside her mourning garments. Jerome, the painter of this vivid picture, had planned a task of the same nature as that of Eusebius of Caesarea. I propose, he says in the beginning of his life of St. Malchus, provided that God grant me the necessary time, in that my censors cease from persecuting a fugitive and a recluse. I propose to relate how, and with the help of what men, from our Lord's advent up to the present day, the Church of Christ was born and developed, how it waxed mighty under persecution, and how it was crowned by martyrdom. How also, when the emperors became Christians, it lost in virtue what it had gained in wealth and in power. Stern words to which many other ecclesiastical writers, to whom the evils of this day were forcibly brought home, had given utterance. After all, persecution, creating as it does formidable perils for the weak, who form the majority, is not the Church's normal condition. Surely the society instituted and governed by Jesus Christ is sufficiently strong. History has proved it, to face and to pass through producing saints the while, the test of prosperity. Jerome did not carry out his scheme, neither did he translate the ecclesiastical history by Eusebius, which in handing down the story of the glorious sources of its origin, has preserved for Christianity its titles of nobility. We owe to Jerome, however, the version of another of the Bishop of Caesarea's works, namely the Chronicle, the original of which has perished. Besides completing the somewhat meager portions concerning Roman history, the translator continued this work from the 20th year of the reign of Constantine until the death of the Emperor Valens in 378. This work, which in spite of its breaks and inaccuracies, rendered a great service during many years, dates from 388. A few years later, in 392, Jerome wrote his De Viris Illustribus, which is the title he himself gave it, although he was acknowledged that he should rather have entitled it De Scriptoribus Ecclesiastis. This latter would perhaps have been a more appropriate title to a work in whose 135 chapters, according to the request of Dexter, the Perfecta de Parricium, are drawn upon a catalogue of authors, all of whom, with the exception of Philo and Seneca, were Christians. Jerome even professed to discover disciples of Christianity in the Jew Alexandrinus and in the Spanish philosopher. A few heretics were also mentioned. Jerome began his list with the name of St. Peter the Apostle. He closed it with his own. I placed myself at the end of the volume, he wrote, even I, a wretched abortion, and the very last among Christians, and I deemed it necessary briefly to indicate all the works written up by me up until the 14th year of the reign of Theodosius. One may criticize this book in which Athenagoras, the apologist, receives no mention, and where conciseness too frequently degenerates into dryness. Yet, in some of Jerome's most eminent qualities are displayed. Evidences of his critical talent are discernible in his refusal to recognize the style of Minucius Felix in a treatise. De Fato, which was ascribed to the polished author of the Octavius. This work of Jerome's obtained a lasting success. Ebert says that it serves as a foundation to a later writers, and however imperfect it may be, it has nonetheless remained to us as an evidence of its author's immense erudition, and in many respects as a unique source of history and literature. Jerome has left us the biography of three hermits. We will first mention that of St. Paul, the institutor of the eremitical life, described to us by the Montalembert, who took this passage in his eloquent summary from Jerome. Discovered by Anthony in his cave, overshadowed by the palm tree, which afforded him food and raiment, he offered him the hospitality which has been so often recorded in history and sung in verse, and died, bequeathing him the tunic of palm leaves, in which Anthony arrayed himself upon Easter Day, and at Whitsuntide, as with the armor of a hero who had passed away at that very moment of victory. It may be remembered that Jerome met, in the vicinity of Antioch, the monk Malchus, and it was from the mouth of this aged man who had at last entered upon the peace of the desert, that he heard the narrative of the strange adventures of which his biography is composed. The life of Saint Hilarion, which was also drawn from an oral source, as well as from written documents. A letter from Saint Epiphanius is mentioned in the first chapter. It covers more ground than the two other biographies. The ascetic of Bethlehem seems to have delighted in glorifying his daring contemporary, who introduced monasticism into Palestine. He relates his penances and miracles. He follows in his journeys to Egypt and Sicily, to the island of Cyprus, where Hilarion expired at the age of 80, addressing the following joyful exhortation to his soul. Speed forth, O my soul, what fearest thou? After serving Christ for nigh upon 70 years, wouldst thou shrink affrighted from death? In this cursory review of the works of St. Jerome, his letters, which have however been freely and frequently quoted, and whose ample and attractive matter with well-repaid study have not yet been mentioned, M. Aber has divided these letters into 6 categories. First, those in which Jerome relates incidents of his own life and of the life of others. Then, what the saint termed consolatory letters, scripsi consolatorum, epistolium, the morte filiae and paulium, funeral orations, epitheria, letters of exhortation. This title is Jerome's. Polemical apologetic letters, in which the authors both defends and attacks. And finally, the detached letters, such as the 57th letter to Pamanakius, in which last class M. Eber includes the exegetical letters. St. Jerome, says this author, first gave the true model of the modern epistolary style. His individuality never revealed itself under more remarkable and varied aspects than in his correspondence. The collection of his letters were the delight of the Middle Ages. The world at the time of the Reformation still reveled in them. Isramus, an ardent admirer of St. Jerome, whose command of language he had the temerity to compare with that of Cicero, was one of the most enthusiastic panegyrists of the correspondence, which he would willingly have commentated. Flageret jam olim nihi incredibili adore animus Hieronymus epistolas commentario illustrandi, he wrote. The eminent humanist exceeded all limits when, in his reaction against the scholastic, he complained of the sensation which Albert the Great and Duns Scotus, for whom we are more just than he, was creating in the schools. Scotus Albertus et his impolitus actores omnibus and scholiis presperant. But he was fully justified when he pleaded that the hermit of Bethlehem should also be listened to, and when he demanded that the eloquent defender of the teachings of Christianity should be accorded a prominent place. Jerome's letters afforded us pleasure for the same reasons that they delighted our forebears. We see the scenes which they put before us, for example, the description of the invasion of the Huns, in the letter to Oceanus, Fabiola's funeral oration, in another letter, the picture of the desert island, whither Bonosus, the friend of his younger days, had retired. Bonosus, he wrote to Rufinus, with whom he was then still on affectionate terms, thy friend and mine is extending to the prophetic letter of Jacob's dream. He bears his cross, gives no thought to the morrow, and he looks not backward. He sows in tears so that he may reap in joy. The truth of such is a miracle of such a miracle surpasses all the wonders invented by the poets of Greece and Rome. A youth of honorable family, who received the same literary education as you and I, distinguished among his contemporaries by reason of his rank and wealth, abandons his mother, his sisters, and a tenderly cherished brother, to land upon an island upon whose shores fertile and shipwreck the sounding waves will expend their fury, and which presents not to the eye but jagged rocks and barren deserts. He at once establishes himself as though in a paradise. No laborer, no monk, not even the young Onesimus, whom thou knowest and whom he loved like a brother, shares his solitude in this vast wilderness. He is alone, or rather he is not alone, for Christ is with him. And he contemplates the glory of God which the apostles saw only in the desert. He discovers no towers to strengthen towns, but he has caused his name to be inscribed upon the roll of the new and eternal city. His limbs shiver under a wretched hair shirt, but thus arrayed he will the sooner penetrate the clouds and meet his Christ. He cannot hearken to the flow of pleasant fountains, but he drinks the water which gush from the Saviour's side. An angry sea moans the island, and the waves break with a crash upon its treacherous reefs. On land, there is no avenger, no luxuriant foliage casting shade upon the fields. Rocks stand sentinel upon every side, and the island is as if imprisoned. But Bono says, calm and turbid, guided with the arms of which the apostle has spoken, in his constant pursuit of the Holy Scriptures, discerns the voice of God, and communes with him in his prayers. Perhaps some vision may appear to him upon the rock-bound island, as it did to John, who regulated to Patmos. Like our predecessors, we read in these letters, which date from 370 to 419, the annals of half a century, and as M. Aber observes, we find in them a most interesting portrait gallery and a picture, which from the point of view of the civilization of the epoch is invaluable. In these letters, a procession of personages, some famous, others obscure, continually pass before us. An allusion to a few of them would not be amiss. Without mentioning those women, Paula, Eustochia, Marcella, and many others who are valiant, even unto heroism, and who formed such an incomparable escort to Jerome's name in history, notable among his correspondence with Pope Damasus, Augustine of Hippo, Chromates of Aquileia, Helidorus, and Polonius of Nola, whom Jerome in an eloquent letter exhorted to the study of the holy works, saying, I ask you, beloved brother, to live in the midst of all these things, revealed to us by the Scriptures, to meditate upon them, to know and to seek naught else. Does it not seem as if this were beginning here below the life of heaven? Do not take exception to the simplicity of the Scriptures and to the unpolished language, which betokens either a mistake of the translator or the intention of the pious author, who wished to make himself understood by the vulgar, and in the same discords instruct both the learned and the ignorant. I do not flatter myself that I understand everything in the Scriptures, and that I am able to gather upon this terrestrial plane the fruits of a tree whose roots are in heaven. Still, I confess it is this for which I yearn. To one who has not yet begun to walk, I offer myself, not as a master, but as a companion. To him who asks is given. To him who knocks is open. He who seeks finds. Let us acquire upon earth knowledge which will stand us in good stead in heaven. In another letter, Jerome, after having praised the learning in the town of Polonius, again said to him, to this learning, to this eloquence, add the study and the understanding of the Scriptures, and thou wilt soon surpass it all. Gird then, I beg of thee, thy loins for toil, for life gives nothing to mortals, except at the cost of arduous labor. Be illustrious in the church, as thou wert in the senate. Amass spiritual treasures which thou canst daily pour forth. May these spiritual riches never fail thee now that thou art in the prime of life, and may thy hair not yet grow white. Indeed, nothing mediocre will content me. To see that in the foremost rank, to see thee perfect, is my ambition. These letters, in which 50 years of political and religious history are vividly revived, and which evoke so many and such varied characters, are interesting in still another respect, namely in the fact that they reveal Jerome to us better than any of his other works. A correspondence is generally the true portrait and history of a soul, and when this soul has been a noble one when to express noble sentiments, it has found eloquence, we can but delight in reading the history and in contemplating the portrait which it has left us of itself in the pages of a correspondence frequently written from day to day. This is why we revert with pleasure to Jerome's letters, at least to certain of Jerome's letters. That also is a secret of the fascination which St. Augustine's correspondence exercises over those who have once tasted of its living fountains, which give forth both tenderness and doctrine. We experience a similar and even more penetrating charm, for we are on more familiar ground when we reopen the correspondence of Father Lacroix, especially the letters to Madame Swetcher, from those written in anxious and troublous times, to the letter dated in the 30th of September, 1856, in which we see the restore of the Dominican order in France, in the serene glory of twilight, like an aged lion who was journeying in the deserts, and who, in majestic repose, contemplates with a somewhat melancholy air the sea and its waves. The line recalls us to St. Jerome, whose doctrine we have still to briefly expound, although it is always a matter of some doubt whether in the proper acceptation of the word St. Jerome may be said to have had a doctrine. Thank you for joining me on this next chapter of the book of St. Jerome. I hope you guys have a great morning, day, evening, night, and may God bless you all.